Moving on now to the other image that I gave you, the composite portrait example, let's talk about some techniques that you can use continuing with masking. So here I have just two examples, both taken from what you could do with the two images that I gave you, just a single portrait and the tree. And you can see that they have two different kind of styles. This one, I kept the hard edge of the portrait, but on the top here I kind of cut into the head a little bit so it was a little more organic looking and kind of followed the shapes of the trees that I filled into the portrait. In this one, it's a little bit softer overall. You can see a little bit of the original portrait here, a little bit of the face, and the edges all over are kind of soft. So these are just to give you some ideas. And of course, I wouldn't want to have a white background. I'd like you to have something on the background, try maybe just a texture or gradients. And the portrait should take the entire space of the image. And also, it should be filled with multiple images inside. So this is just like little short examples. So starting back from the example when you download it, this is what we have. So both of these images had white backgrounds, and I got rid of the white non-destructively by using a mask, although you certainly could just delete the white. I'm not concerned about the destructive nature of it. It's more, I have the mask so I can keep editing it. The only reason I have it on a red background right now is because it really allows me to see how did I do on my selection. If I had a white background, it looks like I did very well on my selection, and then I may not notice that there are problems until I start to merge the images together. So I always put it on a red or some sort of bright colored background so I could see. Now we can see that the guy over here has spiky hair, and I use the quick selection tool to select the white and mask it out, but I could certainly refine that. I could step backwards here, and so I'm going to delete this layer mask, and I'll turn this layer off so we can see. I'll just start this one from the beginning. So I could take my quick selection tool and go around and just do a sort of a fast selection of him. And it did a pretty decent job, but I lost like some of the hairs, and so I could switch it to the take away and make my brush a little bit smaller here. Oh, I was using the wrong key. Make my brush a little bit smaller, and I could try to kind of bounce it out a little bit so I get back some of those hairs. Okay, with that selection still active, I'm going to go to my mask icon, and I'm going to hit the icon to create the mask. It made my selection into a mask, but it did the opposite of what I wanted. I need to invert my selection. So I'm going to double click my mask, and then I'm going to hit the invert button. Okay, so that's kind of where we just left off. So I have it masked. I could click OK, and here it is, and it's the stuff that I selected is now masked off. And there's my tree layer. Okay, so now what if I have it and I want to keep working on it? I want to touch it up some more. So I'm going to double click the layer mask, and I'm going to get this window again. And this time, what I really suggest using to try to go around and get the little spikes around a hair or around the edges of a plant, of a tree, to get the little leaves and stuff, you're going to come over here to your brushes, and we're going to, the refine edge brush, and I'm going to use that. It's kind of like a paintbrush. I'm in the positive mode, and it allows me just to kind of go around the edges, and it does a really great job of finding the edges. It does a better job than my selection tool and masking out. So I'm adding to my mask any of those parts that were white. So now I can get a much better job around the hair. So I really recommend doing this process around the hair and around the edges of any plants. Anything that's kind of has these choppy edges. And then it's a pretty good selection, but it's a little choppy here, so I'm going to smooth it just a little bit, and then we see that a little bit smoother, and then I think everything else looks okay. So I'm now going to say okay. All right, and if I wanted to continue working on it, that's what I would do. I would just double click on the mask icon, and I'd get that window, and I could try shifting the edge if I wanted to, bring it in. Now I'm going to bring this guy back again, and at this point I'd be pretty happy to see this on a white background and get rid of the red. So clicking on that layer, and I'm going to quickly choose white from my defaults over here and Alt backspace to fill it in. All right, and now I'm going to move him to be, take my move tool, on top of the tree. Okay, and then a couple of things I could do. I could do the clipping mask, and I could clip the tree into his portrait. And that's what I did in my last example. So that was holding the Alt key down or right-clicking in between the two layers and choose clipping mask. All right, so now this is kind of a good starting point. I want to sort of move things around. I want them to be filled more with tree image. So what else could you do? Well, I could continue to work on my mask and remove parts of the image. So let's say I want to kind of let the top part of this be just the shape of the leaves here. So I want to mask out more of his head. So I'm going to click on the mask, but I'd like you to explore also the different kinds of paintbrushes. So I'm going to click on the paintbrushes, and scrolling down towards the bottom, there are some textured paintbrushes, and that can be a really interesting way to sort of mask out, remove things without having that hard edge. So I could take one of these kind of textured ones and then use the textured brush to go in there, and I'm just clicking instead of like dragging as I would a normal paintbrush, and it helps give me a little bit more of like the organic nature it's following. Because if I zoom in on this brush, you can see like it has kind of these funny little edges, so it's really helpful for helping me get that kind of organic look around here. So I'm going to get a little bit smaller, and there we go. Okay, so that could be one method. Then another thing I could do is I don't have to use the masking. So again, I'm painting in black, and my foreground color is in black, and I'm using my mask tool, and I am selected on the mask, not on my image here. I'm on the mask. So this is all non-destructive. But even what I'm doing here doesn't have to be at 100% opacity. So for example, I could use this paintbrush to mask out at a lower opacity, and that's how I could get these kind of softer edges around here. Okay? And then the other thing to consider that you could do is you could lower the opacity of the mask itself. So I'm clicking on this, and I'm lowering the opacity of the mask. I think I'll do that on the tree layer. I'll lower the opacity of the mask. So now I can get like a nice blend. So now I can start getting some interesting blending effects. Another thing that you might want to think about for this project would be the layer blending modes, and you find them up here. So I'm just going to briefly go over to another sample I've set up here where I have my bright red background, and I have a black, and I have a neutral gray, and a white. And so I want to use this sample to explain the blending mode. The blending modes are basically broken off into different groups. This first section here blends the layers for an end result which is darker. I'm going to take the most common one from here, which is multiply. When I am on my top layer, on my gray layer, and I use multiply, notice how my neutral gray became almost the same level of tone, like it still is in the mid-tones, but now it is blending with the layer below. So I'm actually going to step back a second here, and I'm going to merge these three layers so they're all in the same. It'll be a little bit faster. So I turned off my background, and I'm going to go up to layer and say merge visible, and now all three of those are on the same layer, and I can turn that back on. So now I'm going to go back up and do this again, multiply. So you can see what I already showed you with the gray, it blended with the red behind, but notice how the white also disappeared. So when you're using the multiply, anything that is neutral color is going to blend with the color below, and anything that is white is going to disappear. So now I'm going to go to the next section, which is about lightning, and I'm going to use the screen. That's the most common layer mode. I'm going to use that one, and the opposite happened. So I still have my neutral gray, but now it blended, it got lighter, it blended with the background, and it got lighter. My white stays the same, and my black is the one that disappeared. Okay, so now we'll do the third one, and you can probably guess something's going to happen with the middle. I'm going to use the most common one here, and that is the overlay. And in the overlay, my gray disappeared. I still have a dark and a light, but they are blending with the background, and so my light is now is lighter and blended with the background, and my dark is darker blended with the background, and my neutral gray is gone. Other ones over here are just different kinds of effects, but feel free to play with these for this project and see what other kinds of effects that you can get. So go back over to this one. And so it's all about how the layer that you're on blends with the layer below. So I'm going to move the opacity of this back up, and we can just look at some of these. So if I multiply, for example, I start getting some interesting kind of effects. We can just scan through and go through. If I screen, it gets a lot brighter. And if I use the overlay, then I'm getting rid of my neutral grays. So what I'd like for you to experiment with these projects is experiment with the edges. Don't make it just like your erasure project where it's just simply clipping in. Try to blend in the backgrounds or experiment with the different kinds of forms. You have a couple of these to do, so you can use that as an opportunity to continue to play with different kinds of brushes, different opacities of the brushes, different opacities of the layer mask, and so on and so forth. Okay, the one last thing, sorry, I actually didn't mention in this one was you can use also the gradient tool on your mask here. So for example, if I'm on my mask of the tree, I can go over to the gradient tool and I could do that effect. This is what I just did in the vase and water droplet video, but you could do that as well as another method for blending it in. Okay, have fun with this project.